My sister mocked me for spending another New Year's Eve alone. Seconds later, my boyfriend of 8 years walked through the front door. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 37 years old, and according to my family, I'm the cautionary tale they quietly point to whenever someone asks what happens if you care too much about your career. If you asked my patients who I was, they'd tell you I was a neurologist who never rushed through a conversation. My colleagues would probably call me obsessive, in the most respectful way possible. I specialized in traumatic brain injury research, the kind of work measured not by applause, but by statistics, treatment protocols, and the rare miracle of watching someone regain pieces of the life everyone thought they'd lost forever. I loved my work and never regretted choosing it. What I regretted was believing my family would one day understand it. They never did. To them, I was simply the daughter who still wasn't married. Every Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthday, and family barbecue, the conversation always circled back to the same place. So, my mother would refill my glass. Have you met anyone yet? If I said I'd been busy, she'd nod sympathetically. If I mentioned a conference, she'd smile politely before changing the subject. If I talked about publishing a paper, someone would inevitably interrupt to ask how my sister's children were doing in soccer. After enough years, I stopped trying because I grew tired of watching my life disappear in the middle of someone else's story. My older sister, Vanessa, was everything our parents understood. She married at 26, bought a beautiful house in the suburbs before she turned 30, had 2 energetic boys whose school activities, birthday parties, and family photos covered my parents' refrigerator. Her life was visible, easy to explain, and easy to celebrate. Mine wasn't. Research didn't make for exciting dinner conversation. No one wanted to hear about clinical trials over mashed potatoes. No one asked what it felt like to tell a family their son had finally recognized his mother's face after months of rehabilitation. Those moments mattered to me, but they didn't fit the version of success my family had already decided to admire. I don't blame them as much as I used to. People can only appreciate what they understand, and my family never tried very hard to understand me. Vanessa wasn't cruel every minute of every day. In some ways, that made it harder. She was charming, funny, and confident, the kind of person who could make an insult sound like practical advice. You know, she'd say while cutting into dessert, there's nothing wrong with lowering your standards. Or, I just don't want you waking up at 50 wondering where the time went. Everyone laughed, even my parents sometimes. Not because they wanted to hurt me, because they'd heard it so many times it had become part of the family script. Eventually, I learned my own role. Smile. Change the subject. Go home. There was just one thing none of them knew. The lonely woman they kept trying to fix didn't exist. For nearly 8 years, my life had begun and ended with someone who made every ordinary day feel extraordinary. His name was Adrian Hayes. He wasn't a secret because I enjoyed hiding him. He became one because I loved him too much to place him in front of people who barely noticed me. We met at an international medical technology conference in Boston. I challenged one of his company's presentations during the audience Q&A. Afterward, instead of arguing, he walked over carrying 2 coffees. I figured one of us should apologize. I laughed. You were wrong. I know, he said. The coffee isn't an apology. It's a peace offering. We ended up talking for almost 4 hours. We talked about medicine, engineering, books, and why airport coffee somehow tasted better after long conferences. Neither of us noticed the convention center had almost emptied. 3 months later, he flew to Chicago just to take me to dinner. 6 months later, I realized I couldn't imagine a future that didn't include him. Years passed quietly. We traveled whenever our schedules aligned, cooked dinner together more often than we ate out, argued over paint colors while renovating our townhouse, and eventually adopted an elderly golden retriever named Oliver. Sometimes he asked gently, "Do you think your parents are ready to meet me?" I'd smile. Not yet. He never pressured me. He understood something I hadn't fully admitted to myself. I wasn't protecting myself anymore. I was protecting him, because I knew exactly what would happen. They wouldn't ask about the man I loved. They'd ask why I'd hidden him instead. Then, somehow, they'd make my happiness feel like another mistake. So we waited. 1 year became 2, then 5, then nearly 8, until one phone call changed everything. 3 days before New Year's Eve, my mother called. Her voice sounded tired. "Your father's been exhausted lately. Is he okay?" "The doctor says he's fine. I'd really like everyone together this year." I looked across the living room. Adrian sat on the sofa reading reports on his tablet. Oliver slept with his head resting on Adrian's shoe. "I'll come," I said softly. When I hung up, Adrian looked up. "Everything okay?" "My mom wants everyone home for New Year's." He nodded. "You should go." "Aren't you coming?" He smiled. I wasn't invited. The words landed harder than either of us expected. After a moment, he reached across the couch and squeezed my hand. "Go spend time with your parents. I'll call you at midnight." "I'll answer." On New Year's Eve, I drove the 3 hours to my parents' house. Nothing had changed. The white porch swing, the old oak tree, and the chipped flower pot my mother still refused to replace because my grandmother had painted it decades ago. Walking through the front door felt like stepping backward through time. Vanessa was already there. Of course she was. She hugged our mother dramatically before turning toward me. "There she is, the busiest woman in America." Trevor offered me a warm smile. He had perfected the art of surviving family dinners by speaking as little as possible. Dinner began pleasantly enough, for almost 20 minutes. Then Vanessa noticed I'd arrived alone. So, she tilted her wine glass. No mystery boyfriend this year either? I smiled politely. No. What a shame. My father cleared his throat. Vanessa. She ignored him. I just worry about you. She reached across the table and touched my hand with exaggerated sympathy. You're 37 now. She glanced around the table before saying it loud enough for everyone to hear. Doesn't it ever get lonely spending every New Year's alone? The room fell quiet. I slowly set my wine glass on the table. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the hallway. I met my sister's eyes. Then the doorbell rang. Everyone turned toward the hallway. Instead of feeling anxious, I felt my heartbeat slow. Only one person knew this address, and only one had promised I wouldn't have to face the night alone. I stood, walked to the front door, rested my hand on the doorknob, and took one slow breath before opening it. There he was. Adrian stood beneath the porch light, snow dusting the shoulders of his charcoal overcoat. One hand held a small overnight bag. The other carried a neatly wrapped gift basket tied with a deep burgundy ribbon. When he saw me, his expression softened. I hope I'm not too late. For a moment, I couldn't speak. You said you weren't coming. I wasn't. He smiled. Then I realized I didn't like the idea of you starting another year pretending you were alone. I laughed quietly, my eyes stinging. You drove 3 hours just to ruin my secret? I drove 3 hours because I love you. Before I could answer, my mother's voice drifted from the dining room. Emily, who's at the door? Adrian looked at me. If this isn't the right moment, we can do this another day. Instead, I reached for his hand. No, I squeezed it gently. I think I've hidden long enough. His fingers tightened around mine. Together we stepped inside. Conversation stopped as 5 faces turned toward us. My mother's smile appeared automatically. Oh, she glanced between us. I didn't realize you were expecting someone. I'm sorry for arriving unannounced, Adrian said politely. My name is Adrian Hayes. His voice was calm, confident, and warm without sounding rehearsed. He offered the gift basket to my mother. I heard you enjoy dark chocolate and Earl Grey tea. Emily mentioned both. She accepted it almost instinctively. Oh, thank you. Then she looked at me. You never said anyone was coming. I know. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, studying Adrian from head to toe. So, and who exactly are you? I'm Emily's boyfriend. Silence settled over the room. Not awkward, but absolute. The refrigerator hummed, the heating vents clicked, and early fireworks cracked in the distance. Vanessa blinked twice. I'm sorry. She laughed once. You're what? My boyfriend, I repeated calmly. Trevor nearly dropped his fork. My father removed his glasses and cleaned lenses that didn't need cleaning. My mother looked as though someone had quietly rewritten reality while she wasn't paying attention. Vanessa recovered first. Oh, she smiled again. A little too brightly. Well, that's unexpected. Adrian extended his hand toward my father. It's nice to finally meet you, Mr. Carter. My father shook it automatically. You too. His voice sounded distant, almost mechanical. Please. My mother gestured toward the dining room. Come in. Adrian thanked her and followed me to the table. The only empty chair happened to be beside mine. He pulled it out before I could. The small gesture didn't escape my mother's attention. Neither did the way I thanked him without thinking. These weren't rehearsed manners. They were the quiet habits of two people who had spent years together. Dinner resumed, though no one seemed capable of eating. Vanessa kept glancing at Adrian, searching for something that didn't add up. Finally, she broke the silence. So, how long have you two been dating? I looked at Adrian. He looked back at me. Neither of us had planned this conversation. Neither of us looked nervous. Almost 8 years, I said. The fork slipped from my mother's hand. It struck her plate with a sharp metallic clang. What? 8 years. No. Vanessa shook her head immediately. That's impossible. Why? You've never mentioned him. That's true. And none of us have ever met him. Also true. She folded her arms. So how exactly are we supposed to believe this? Adrian didn't interrupt. He simply reached beneath the table and rested his hand gently over mine. It wasn't a performance. It was reassurance. My father noticed. So did Trevor. Vanessa continued. Where did you even meet? A medical technology conference, Adrian answered. In Boston. Emily challenged one of my company's presentations during a panel discussion. I was wrong. He smiled at me. She proved it in front of about 300 people. Trevor laughed before he could stop himself. You started dating after arguing? We started talking after arguing. Adrian grinned. The dating came later. Even my mother smiled a little. You flew to Chicago for our second date, I reminded him. You counted? I counted everything. Our eyes met for a brief moment. 8 years of ordinary mornings, late-night grocery runs, airport reunions, movie nights, and small arguments over whose turn it was to wash the dishes passed between us in a single glance. My father cleared his throat. So, what do you do, Adrian? I oversee medical innovation partnerships for a surgical robotics company. Vanessa frowned. Meaning? I work with hospitals and research teams to develop robotic surgical systems. Oh, she nodded slowly. So you're successful? Adrian chuckled politely. I've been fortunate. He didn't mention his awards, international conferences, or interviews. Instead, he asked my father about his years teaching history. Within minutes, they were discussing the Cold War, historical archives, and how technology had changed education. My father leaned forward, genuinely interested. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen him engage a stranger with that much curiosity. Then my mother turned to me. "When did all this happen?" I smiled gently. "Over the last 8 years." "But—" She looked genuinely lost. "You've always come to holidays alone." "Yes." "Birthdays too." "Yes." "I didn't think—" She stopped. "I know." Vanessa set down her glass. "I still don't buy it." Everyone looked at her. She shrugged. "I'm sorry. I've watched Emily for years. She's always working, always traveling. And suddenly this perfect boyfriend appears out of nowhere?" She turned to Adrian. "You expect us to believe you've been together for 8 years and nobody knew?" "I never asked Emily to keep me a secret," Adrian said calmly. "I respected her reasons." Vanessa narrowed her eyes. "And what reasons were those?" The question lingered in the air. I knew I could answer, but I also knew the answer would change this family forever. Instead, Adrian reached into the inside pocket of his coat. "I wasn't planning to do this tonight." He set his wallet on the table and removed a slightly worn photograph. It wasn't glamorous, just the two of us sitting on the floor of our first apartment, covered in paint after spending an entire weekend renovating the living room. My hair was tied in a messy bun. There was blue paint on Adrian's cheek. I was laughing so hard my eyes were completely closed. On the back, written in faded black ink, were the words, "Our first home, August 14th, 8 years ago." My mother covered her mouth. Trevor stared in silence. Even Vanessa hesitated. Then Adrian unlocked his phone. He didn't scroll through polished vacation photos or carefully posed selfies. He showed them our real life. Oliver asleep between us on the couch, burned Christmas cookies, the tiny vegetable garden we'd failed to keep alive, rainy weekends, airport reunions, birthday breakfasts, and anniversaries. Hundreds of ordinary moments no one would ever think to stage. Vanessa's confidence began to crack. She looked at me, then back at the screen, and finally at Adrian. Finally, in a much quieter voice, she asked, "Why would you hide something this important from your own family?" I met her eyes. For years, I'd imagined answering that question with anger. Instead, I only felt tired. Then I said, "Because every time I shared something that mattered to me, it disappeared before any of you ever really saw it." Silence settled over the dining room. For the first time that night, no one seemed to know what to say. No one reached for another bite or lifted a glass. Even the old clock in the hallway seemed louder than before. My mother spoke first. "I don't understand." Her voice trembled, not with anger, but confusion. "Emily, why wouldn't you tell us?" I looked around the table at the people who had known me my entire life. They knew my favorite pie, the color of my childhood bedroom, yet somehow knew almost nothing about the life I'd spent the last 8 years building. I'd imagined this conversation countless times, but when it finally happened, I felt strangely calm. "Can I ask all of you something?" No one answered. "Do any of you know exactly what I do for a living?" Vanessa frowned. "You're a neurologist." "I know that." I asked exactly. She opened her mouth, then stopped. "My father tried." "You treat brain injuries." "I help develop treatment protocols for severe traumatic brain injuries." I spoke quietly. "The research team I lead has spent the last 6 years improving emergency treatment during the first 72 hours after traumatic brain injury." I turned toward my mother. "Last spring, our protocol was adopted by hospitals in 12 states. They stared back at me with blank expressions. No one recognized what I was talking about. No one remembers because no one asked. I wasn't accusing them. I was simply stating a fact. I sent the announcement in our family group chat. My mother blinked. "I don't remember." "I know." I looked at Vanessa. "You replied with a thumbs up." She shifted uncomfortably. "I was probably busy." "You were. You immediately posted 27 photos from Mason's baseball tournament." Her face flushed. "I didn't mean anything by that." "I believe you. I really do." The room fell quiet again. That's what made it hurt. Nobody had ignored me on purpose, which somehow made it even worse. It had simply become as automatic as breathing. "I used to tell you everything." I smiled faintly. "Remember when I got accepted into Johns Hopkins for my fellowship?" My father nodded slowly. "I remember. You congratulated me." "I did." The next 10 minutes of dinner were spent talking about Vanessa's kitchen renovation. He lowered his eyes. "When I received my first federal research grant, I mailed everyone copies because I was so excited." I laughed softly. "No one ever mentioned them." My mother whispered. "I thought they were work papers." "They were. They also represented 8 years of work." No one interrupted. "So eventually, I stopped sharing." I looked at Adrian. Then I met someone who celebrated every little thing. The first paper I published after we started dating, he bought a cake. Adrian laughed. "It was a terrible cake. The bakery misspelled your name. They spelled Emily with 2 M's. Trevor chuckled. "And they wrote, 'Congratulations, Dr. Emmy.'" For the first time all evening, everyone smiled, if only a little. I still have a picture of that cake. I smiled. Not because it looked good, because someone believed my accomplishment deserved celebrating. I reached for Adrian's hand. When I received my promotion, he took me to dinner. When my research won an award, he flew across the country just to surprise me. When I lost a patient I'd been fighting to save for months, he sat beside me all night. He never tried to fix it. He just stayed. Adrian looked down with a modest smile. "You would have done the same." I did. The words were simple and honest, exactly the kind of love we'd built together. There were no grand speeches or dramatic gestures, just someone who always showed up. My mother quietly wiped at the corner of one eye. I didn't know. I know. She looked genuinely heartbroken. I feel like I've missed your whole life. You missed the parts I stopped trying to show you. Vanessa folded her arms again. This time she folded her arms as though she were holding herself together. So, you seriously expected us to notice all of this? I met her gaze. I expected nothing. I only hoped. There's a difference. She looked away. I wasn't trying to make you feel invisible. I know. But intentions don't erase outcomes. She swallowed. The confidence she'd carried all evening was fading piece by piece. Trevor spoke for the first time in nearly 15 minutes. Can I say something? Everyone turned toward him. I've known Vanessa for almost 15 years. He hesitated. And I don't think any of us realized how every conversation eventually became about us. Vanessa looked at him. Trevor, I'm serious. He sighed. I don't think we noticed because Emily never complained. He turned to me. You always smiled. I thought you genuinely didn't care. I cared, I answered softly. I just got tired. The words landed harder than I expected because they were true. I wasn't tired of my family. I was tired of competing for a place in conversations that should never have required competition. My father suddenly pushed back his chair, startling everyone. Without a word, he walked into the living room. For several long seconds, all we heard were drawers opening and closing before my father returned, carrying an old photo album. He placed it on the table. Slowly, he turned the pages. Page after page featured Vanessa, the boys, Trevor, and only the occasional photo of me. Trevor, then my college graduation. 1 picture. Medical school. 1 picture. Residency. None. Research awards. None. Conference presentations. None. He stopped turning the pages. His shoulders sagged. I never noticed. His voice was barely audible. I thought we were recording our family. He stared down at the album. We only recorded the parts that were easiest to photograph. No one spoke. He closed the album gently, then looked at Adrian. You've known my daughter for 8 years. Yes. And in all that time, you never thought badly of us? Adrian considered the question before answering. I thought Emily loved you. He paused. And I thought she was protecting the people she loved. All of them. The answer hurt because it carried no accusation. Outside, fireworks burst somewhere across the neighborhood. Bright flashes from distant fireworks flickered across the dining room windows as midnight drew closer. My phone vibrated softly on the table. I glanced down. A message from Adrian's sister. Hope everything's okay. He's been worried about tonight all week. I smiled to myself. Of course he had. He'd known this conversation would happen eventually. Neither of us had imagined it unfolding like this. My mother looked at me. Emily! Her voice cracked. What happens now? I looked around the table, then at Adrian, then back at my family. For tonight, I think I finally told the truth. I stood and reached for my coat. Outside, another burst of fireworks lit the snow-covered yard. Midnight was less than 10 minutes away. For the first time in years, I felt lighter walking toward the door than I had walking into the house. I didn't make it to the front door. Emily. My mother's voice stopped me halfway across the dining room. I turned. She was standing, her hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles had turned white. Please. She swallowed. Don't leave yet. I looked at Adrian. He gave me the slightest nod. Your choice. That was one of the reasons I'd fallen in love with him. He never made decisions for me. He simply stood beside me while I made them myself. I slowly set my coat back over the chair. Okay. No one spoke for several seconds. Fireworks continued bursting outside, but inside the house, time seemed to slow. My father finally leaned forward. He rubbed his hands together. I think we've spent years talking about Emily. He looked directly at me, but not actually talking to her. No one argued, not even Vanessa. My mother took a slow breath. Tell us about your life. The request sounded almost timid, as though she wasn't sure she still had the right to ask. I sat back down. So where do you want me to start? She smiled sadly. The beginning. I glanced at Adrian. We bought our townhouse 6 years ago. My mother's eyebrows lifted. You own a house together? We do. My father looked surprised. What part of Chicago? Lincoln Park. Trevor let out a low whistle. That's not exactly inexpensive. Adrian smiled modestly. We were fortunate to find it before the market exploded. Vanessa looked between us. You've really been living together all this time? I nodded. Almost 6 years. And nobody knew? No. Not one person. My mother lowered her eyes. I don't even know your address. The sentence hurt more than any accusation because neither of us had realized how true it was until she said it aloud. She didn't know where I lived. She'd never seen my living room, shared coffee in my kitchen, or met Oliver. Entire chapters of my life had passed without her seeing a single page. Adrian quietly picked up his phone. I hope you don't mind. He opened another photo album. I take far too many pictures. He wasn't exaggerating. The first photo showed Oliver sprawled across our couch. My mother laughed. Oh my goodness. He's adorable. He snores louder than both of us, Adrian said. I deny that. You absolutely shouldn't. He showed another photo of our flower-covered kitchen, then our first Christmas tree, and finally the vegetable garden we'd accidentally killed. Trevor laughed. So you two are terrible gardeners. The tomatoes staged a rebellion, Adrian replied. They never recovered. Even my father smiled. The room felt different. Not healed, but softer, as though everyone was finally meeting people who had existed all along. My mother lingered on one photograph. The photo showed Adrian asleep on the couch, Oliver stretched across his legs, while I sat on the floor beside them reading a medical journal. No one was looking at the camera or posing. Someone had simply captured an ordinary evening. You look... She searched for the word. Peaceful. I looked at the picture. I was. She nodded slowly. I've never seen that expression on your face before. You've never seen me at home before. Her eyes filled with tears. No, I haven't. The admission lingered between us. Vanessa quietly pushed her plate away. I need to ask something. Her voice had lost its edge. When did you know? I smiled toward Adrian. The second conference. He laughed. It wasn't the second. It was. You argued with me for 45 minutes about whether bookstores should organize medical books by specialty or by subject. You were wrong. I still think I'm right. You aren't. Trevor grinned. You two actually argue about bookstores? We've had debates over dishwasher loading techniques, Adrian admitted. And don't ask. Emily believes mugs belong on the top rack. They do. They don't. For the first time that night, genuine, effortless laughter filled the dining room. My father grew serious again. Emily, I owe you an apology. You don't have to. I do, he interrupted gently. I spent years asking when you were going to build a real life. His voice cracked. I never realized you already had one. Something loosened inside my chest because someone had finally named what had been hurting me. My mother reached across the table. I kept waiting for the daughter I imagined, she whispered. I wasn't paying attention to the daughter I actually had. Neither of us moved. Then I reached forward and took her hand. I'm here. She nodded through quiet tears. I know. I'm just very late. Across the table, Vanessa had become unusually quiet. She hadn't touched her wine in nearly 20 minutes. Finally, she looked directly at Adrian. Were you ever angry with us? He thought for a moment. There were moments, he answered honestly. Especially after holidays. My mother looked up. Emily would drive home and pretend everything was fine. He smiled gently at me. But I know her. I could always tell when she'd spent another evening feeling unseen. No one interrupted. No one tried to defend themselves. I wanted to come many times. I even asked if I could. Vanessa turned to me. You always said no? I did. Why? I answered without hesitation. Because I loved him. She frowned. I don't understand. I couldn't bear the thought of the person who made me feel most valued. I paused, walking into a room where I'd spent years feeling invisible. The words settled over the table as my father slowly removed his glasses and my mother wiped away another tear. Trevor stared at the table. Vanessa closed her eyes. No one spoke. Then, unexpectedly, my mother stood. She walked around the table until she reached Adrian. I've missed 8 years, she said softly. I can't get those years back. She hesitated. But if you're willing, she smiled through tears. I'd like the chance to know the man who made my daughter smile like this. Adrian stood immediately. You don't have to ask, he replied warmly. I'd like that too. My mother hugged him. The hug was brief, a little awkward, and completely sincere. When she stepped back, my father extended his hand. Then, changing his mind, he pulled Adrian into a hug. I should have met you a long time ago. So should I, Adrian answered quietly. The clock on the wall began chiming midnight. Outside, fireworks burst across the winter sky. Inside, my phone vibrated. I glanced down. Happy New Year, Em. One of my research assistants. I smiled, then looked around the room. For years, I'd believed revealing my life would destroy what little peace remained between my family and me. Instead, it had destroyed something else. The version of me they thought they knew. That was exactly where healing had to begin. The rest of New Year's Day passed quietly, without dramatic arguments, slammed doors, or accusations. After midnight, everyone seemed emotionally drained. Adrian and I stayed in the guest room after my parents insisted we not drive home through the snow. For the first time in 8 years, I woke up under my parents' roof without pretending I was alone. It felt strangely unfamiliar. The next morning, the smell of coffee drifted upstairs. Adrian was still asleep. Oliver wasn't there to nudge us awake, and for a brief moment, I forgot where I was. Then I remembered. Everything had changed, or maybe it had finally been seen. When we came downstairs, my mother was making pancakes, the same recipe she'd made every New Year's morning since I was a child. She looked up and smiled, not the polite smile she usually gave me, but a real one. Good morning. Morning. Adrian stepped into the kitchen. Can I help? She laughed softly. I've waited 8 years to make breakfast for my daughter's boyfriend. You can sit. The sentence nearly brought tears to my eyes because it was the kind of ordinary I'd quietly wished for years before convincing myself I didn't need it. Breakfast felt lighter than dinner had. My father asked Adrian about medical robotics. Trevor wanted advice for a shoulder injury that had been bothering him. My mother even asked whether Oliver preferred sleeping at the foot of the bed or beside it. They were tiny questions, but each one filled an empty space I'd stopped expecting anyone to notice. Only Vanessa remained quiet, barely touching her coffee. Every so often I caught her watching me, not with resentment or even curiosity, but with something closer to uncertainty. When Adrian offered to help my father shovel snow after breakfast, Trevor joined them. The 3 men disappeared outside in heavy coats and work gloves. The house grew almost silent as my mother gathered the dishes. I'll give you girls some privacy. She disappeared into the kitchen. Vanessa and I were finally alone, for the first time in years. Neither of us knew how to begin. She broke the silence. I almost didn't come downstairs. I looked at her. Why? Because I was embarrassed. The honesty caught me off guard. She stared into her coffee. I don't remember the last time I felt embarrassed around you. I waited. I barely slept. I kept replaying last night. She laughed bitterly. I sounded awful. You sounded like yourself. The words escaped before I could soften them. She nodded. I know. Silence settled between us again. Finally, she looked at me. Can I ask you something? Of course. When did you stop telling me things? I didn't answer right away because there hadn't been one moment. There had been hundreds. I don't think I ever consciously decided. It happened little by little. I'd tell you something exciting. You'd congratulate me. And within 30 seconds, we'd be talking about something else. She frowned. I never noticed. I know. She rubbed her forehead. I genuinely thought you preferred keeping your life private. I became private. There's a difference. She leaned back slowly. I don't know if that's better or worse. It's worse, I answered quietly. Because it means I slowly learned not to expect anything. Her eyes filled with tears. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I believe you. But you still did. She nodded. I know. Outside, laughter drifted through the window after Adrian apparently dropped a shovel into a snowbank, sending Trevor and my father into another round of laughter. The sound felt easy and wonderfully normal. Inside, neither of us laughed. Vanessa watched the steam rise from her mug. Do you know something I've never admitted? I shook my head. When we were kids, I thought you were smarter than me. That wasn't what I'd expected. You always got better grades. You won science fairs. Teachers loved you. I hated how easy everything seemed for you. I smiled sadly. It wasn't easy. I know that now. She nodded. But when I got married, when I had the boys, for the first time, I felt like I'd finally found something I was better at. The confession lingered between us. I didn't even realize I started comparing us, she whispered. I liked feeling like I was finally winning. I met her eyes. There was never a competition. I know. She closed her eyes, but I turned it into one. After a long silence, she said something that hurt far more than anything she'd said the night before. I honestly believed you were lonely. I blinked. What? I truly thought you went home to an empty apartment every night. She looked ashamed. I pitied you. I let the words settle, not because they surprised me, but because I realized she meant every one of them. Every comment, every blind date she'd tried to arrange, and every joke about me being married to my career. She hadn't been mocking a happy woman. She'd been speaking to the version of me she'd created in her own mind. I never asked. She whispered. I just assumed. I nodded. And assumptions become stories. She looked at me. What do you mean? I became the version of me that was easiest for everyone else to understand. The single sister, the workaholic, the lonely daughter. No one questioned the story. So eventually, I stopped trying to correct it. Tears rolled quietly down her face. I missed almost a decade of your life. You did. I don't know how to fix that. You can't. She looked devastated. You can only decide what happens next. She covered her face with both hands. I'm so sorry, Emily. For years, I'd imagined hearing those words. I thought they'd feel triumphant. Instead, they just felt sad, because they couldn't bring back birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, or all the ordinary Sundays we'd never shared. I reached across the table. She looked up. I'm not angry anymore, I said honestly. I was, for a long time. But somewhere along the way, I stopped waiting for you to notice me. She nodded through tears. And that broke something. Yes. But maybe... I squeezed her hand gently. Today is where we stop breaking it. She laughed weakly. You still sound like the older sister. I smiled. I've always been good at giving advice. You have. At that moment, the front door opened. Cold air rushed inside. My father walked in carrying 2 snow-covered shovels. Adrian followed behind him, laughing. What happened? I asked. My father pointed toward Trevor. He slipped into the flower bed. I did not. Trevor protested. You absolutely did, Adrian replied. You took the shovel with you. Even Vanessa laughed. A genuine laugh. The first one I'd heard from her in years that wasn't at someone else's expense. She looked at me, then at Adrian. Finally, she smiled. A small smile. Still fragile, but real. Maybe we weren't becoming the perfect family, and maybe we never would. But for the first time, we were becoming an honest one. Winter gave way to spring, one careful day at a time. Life didn't transform overnight. Families almost never do. There wasn't one magical conversation that erased years of misunderstanding. Nor was there a single apology capable of recovering birthdays, holidays, and quiet moments that had already slipped away. Instead, change arrived in smaller ways, the kind you only notice when you stop expecting grand gestures. About 3 weeks after New Year's, my mother called. Not because she needed help planning a family gathering. Not to ask whether I'd met anyone. Not to remind me I was working too hard. She simply asked, "What are you researching right now?" For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. I smiled and spent nearly 20 minutes explaining. She didn't understand every technical detail, and she admitted that herself. But she listened, really listened. When I finished, she said something I'd wanted to hear for most of my adult life. I'm proud of you. The words didn't erase the past, but they filled a place inside me that had been empty for a very long time. A month later, my father called. "I've been reading." "Reading what?" "The articles you published." I laughed. "They're not exactly light reading." "I noticed." He chuckled. I had to look up half the medical terms. Then he grew quiet. "I should have asked years ago. You don't have to apologize every time we talk." "I know, but I probably will for a while." That made both of us laugh. Vanessa changed too, not dramatically, but quietly, which somehow mattered more. Instead of filling the family group chat with endless soccer updates and neighborhood gossip, she began asking questions. How was my latest conference? How was Oliver recovering after his surgery? Did Adrian finally convince me to replace our ancient coffee maker? They were the ordinary conversations sisters should have been having all along. One Saturday afternoon, she called unexpectedly. "I need your opinion." "On what?" "I'm thinking about going back to school." That surprised me. "For what?" "I don't know." She laughed nervously. "I spent so many years being everyone's mom that I forgot I was allowed to become something else too." We talked for almost 2 hours, not about the past, but about the future. When we hung up, I realized something. For the first time in decades, we'd spent an entire conversation learning about each other instead of comparing ourselves. By early summer, my parents drove to Chicago. This time they came because we'd invited them to dinner, not because they felt guilty. When they arrived at our townhouse, my mother stood quietly in the entryway, taking everything in. "So this is home." "It is." She wandered through the living room, smiling at the bookshelves, the framed travel photographs, and the large windows overlooking the tree-lined street. Then Oliver trotted over with a tennis ball in his mouth. "Oh," she laughed as he leaned happily against her legs. "So this is the famous Oliver? He believes every visitor exists solely to throw tennis balls." Adrian smiled. "He's usually right." Within minutes, Oliver had convinced both of my parents to follow him into the backyard. Watching them laugh together felt strangely unreal, not because it was perfect, but because it was finally normal. Dinner lasted nearly 4 hours. My father and Adrian debated whether artificial intelligence would eventually change surgical training. My mother insisted everyone take home leftovers, even though Adrian had cooked enough food to feed twice as many people. Later that evening, Trevor arrived with Vanessa and the boys. Our dining room became loud, messy, and comfortably crowded. At one point, I stepped into the kitchen to refill everyone's drinks. My mother followed. She stood beside me in comfortable silence before speaking. "I've been thinking about something." "What is it?" She glanced toward the dining room, where Adrian was helping one of Vanessa's sons assemble a complicated model airplane. "I used to believe success looked only one way." She smiled sadly. "A wedding, a mortgage, children. I thought if your life didn't follow that path, something must be missing." She reached over and gently squeezed my hand. "I never imagined the thing that was missing wasn't your happiness." "It was my intention." Neither of us spoke. She blinked away tears. "I'm sorry I didn't see you." I hugged her. This time there was no hesitation. "I know. And I see you now." As autumn arrived, life settled into a rhythm that felt honest. Not perfect, but honest. Vanessa enrolled in evening business classes. My father developed an unexpected fascination with neuroscience and occasionally sent me newspaper articles with enthusiastic notes attached. Most had very little to do with my specialty. I read everyone anyway. Adrian continued traveling internationally for work. I continued balancing research, patients, and long hospital days. Oliver remained convinced squirrels were his personal enemies. Some things, thankfully, never changed. When New Year's Eve came around again, my mother called in early December. "This year," she hesitated. "Would you and Adrian host dinner?" I smiled before answering. "I'd love to." The following weeks passed in a blur of grocery lists, decorations, and last-minute preparations. On December 31st, everyone arrived just before sunset. The townhouse quickly filled with familiar voices. The boys chased Oliver around the living room until he collapsed dramatically onto his favorite rug. Adrian opened sparkling cider for the children and champagne for the adults. As midnight approached, we gathered near the windows overlooking the city skyline. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. I looked around the room. My parents were holding hands. Vanessa was laughing with Trevor, and Adrian stood beside me with his fingers intertwined with mine. 7, 6, 5. A year earlier, I'd walked into my parents' house carrying a secret. Tonight, I carried nothing. No fear, no performance, and no need to prove my life mattered. 4, 3, 2, 1. Outside, fireworks exploded across the Chicago sky. Everyone cheered. Adrian turned toward me. "Happy New Year! Happy New Year!" He kissed my forehead gently. Not because anyone was watching, but because that was what he always did. I rested my head against his shoulder and watched the fireworks light up the night. It occurred to me that the greatest change over the past year wasn't that my family finally understood me. It was that I no longer needed their understanding to believe my life had value. For years, I'd hidden my happiness because I was afraid it would be ignored. Now I understood something even more important. The people who truly love you never make you compete for a place in their hearts. And if they lose sight of you, healing doesn't begin by pretending the past never happened. It begins the moment everyone is willing to see one another clearly. As another year began, I looked around the room filled with laughter, conversation, and second chances. Not everything had been repaired. Some scars never completely disappear, but they can still be proof that healing has begun. I finally understood that home isn't the place where everyone has always known who you are. Home is the place where you no longer have to hide.